Mic's on. We're good to go. All right. So it's 3:30. We'll get started. So welcome to the security series. This is a part of our ongoing informational series to talk about security. Today we're going to go over protecting our identities, some ways to protect other important information. This doesn't necessarily just apply to PSU identities or Penn State data. This is intended for a general audience. It's intended to help you manage your identities in general. But if it helps you with Penn State too, that's great. My name is Matt Socio. I work for Security Operations and Services. I was supposed to have a partner today. He is out sick, so I'm flying solo, but a bunch of his coworkers are here, so they'll keep me kind of honest as I start to go through some of this. So everybody in the room here pretty much knows who I am, and I was kind of hoping that wasn't going to be the case, because really, and I guess people out in Adobe Connect land, I don't see the list, but how do you know I am who I say I am? You know, how can you tell that it's really me here in the room? And really, for this presentation, do we even care? Like, does it really matter if I said my name was Max Miller? But, you know, think of somewhere different. If we weren't in this room just giving a presentation, trading some freely available information, if we were at the bank or at an airport, then stakes start to get a little higher, risks start to become an issue. And in these situations, you know, in person, we have ways of verifying that I am who I say I am. There's driver's license, passports, your PSU ID has some context here at the university that helps with identification and access to certain things. You know, your fingerprint, a lot of times the banks now take your thumbprint. So basically verifying in person is a fairly simple task, and there's a reason for this. Like your driver's license can be trusted. Why? It's because there's a whole agency. You've all been to the DMV. You know that there's some verification step. You know you've been put into a system. You're familiar with how that all works. You've seen the controls on your license that are hard to fake. I guess when I was younger, it was easier to fake driver's license. Not so much anymore. So there's some trust that's inherently built into these passports, into the driver's license, into these systems, because there's a third-party issuing agent. So we can trust those. Now they obviously can be faked in this day and age and everything, but for the most part, when somebody shows you a driver's license or a passport, you're pretty well good to go. On the internet, we're in a completely different ballpark, though. It's really easy I mean, most places, you even sign up with a pseudonym. You don't really use your real name on the internet very much. So it's really easy to, A, fake who you are, and B, get somebody else to tell you who they really are and give away too much information. And really, you know, if you think of what a con man is, it's confidence. So you build confidence in another person, you build some trust, and then execute the old switcheroo, or you take something from them, or, you know, the internet really makes it a lot easier for that con game to happen, because you don't really have to be in person. You can shoot it out to hundreds and thousands, if not millions of people all at once. And if you really only get a fraction of a percent worth of a return rate, you're still getting a return rate. Whereas, you know, in person, you really got to work and find your mark and that kind of stuff. So The internet really lowered the bar in that space as far as being able to trust someone, being able to gain trust, being able to get information from people. And the part about stealing identities, there's lots of information out there. There's lots of ways to do it. I think it was a year ago, I forget the guy's name, Matt Honan, the Gizmodo or Engadget or Wired reporter. Basically, they grabbed either his, I forget if it was his Google or his Amazon first, but one or the other. He was able to get the last 4 digits of the credit card number, and therefore he was then able to call Apple ID and say, here's the last 4 digits. They got his Apple ID. They started erasing his iPad. They started deleting all of his Mac cloud stuff. The guy's life was basically wrecked because they managed to sort of get a toehold on his identity. And that case is pretty extreme. I'm not sure what he did to make someone angry. Most of the time when identities are stolen, it's to use for credit card, for cashing out bank accounts, for monetary gain. So it is stuff that we should take seriously in most spaces. So we kind of want to talk about authentication in this digital space on the internet. We're going to go over 3 basic things. It's something you know, something you have, and something you are. And the something you know is generally a password. So anytime you log in to web access, to your workstation, there's a username and a password. Passwords are quickly becoming obsolete. There are way too many user behavior issues around them that you simply can't solve with technological problems. We put password strength rules into our Active Directory or our Kerberos server or whatever directory service we have, and users end up writing them down. If you make it inconvenient for where people need to access things, they'll share passwords, which is a problem. Given the state of modern computing, passwords are really crackable now. It's very easy to access passwords, and there's a lot of neat things that you can know. If you do a passphrase with a bunch of different words, it makes it a little bit more difficult to crack. But with the advent of rainbow tables and very custom cracking routines, people can generally get to most passwords that are even in that 14, 15 character length. Anything under 8 or 10, it's pretty much just a wash. That can be cracked pretty quickly. And they're also easily stolen, like with keyloggers. If there's some forms of malware, viruses, trojans, whatever you want to call them, that you get on your computer that will sit and listen for keystrokes and grab your passwords. And there's also USB keys that have been plugged in various places to grab passwords right off of the computer. We'll get to password reuse in a little bit. But because they're becoming obsolete, we're going to start hearing more about the something you have. So this is what we're calling the second factor in authentication. And this can take several different forms. A hard token, it can be your phone if you have a mobile app on your phone. There's USB keys. I have one. It's that little thing is a YubiKey, which has basically a cert on it. And so when I use certain applications on the internet, it asks me to plug into my USB port and push this on, and it basically does a copy and paste of this cert, and the YubiKey basically says, yeah, that's him. It verifies it. Smart cards are starting to show up in profiles as small as your ID cards. When we look at these, when you combine this something you have with a password, which is something you know, we can start to trust that a little more, generally because of the behavior around the something you have. And this is, it's funny because we, as a security professional, we kind of get scared of the BYOD stuff. But when I think about how people treat their phone, like if I left my phone here on this podium today, I'd be back for it before the sun went down. I would turn around, I'd come back for it, and when I think about my little token here that I have, that's, my little RSA token, like what's on the screen here, the little green thing, if I left that here, I could pick it up in the morning, which isn't good behavior either. It should be something that I have, all the time. So when we start thinking in this something you have space, again, we want to balance what's good security, which the phone probably has some places we can trust, other places where it's not so much, but it has the behavior element. So, striking that balance of how you do second factor really comes down to how are the users going to use it, how are they going to experience it. Max? Yes. Correct. So Max is telling me a story about an iPhone that he found on 550, which I would imagine if the folks knew that it was laying on the middle of the road, so you called them. So Max called them and got the phone back to them. However, the point is when you forget your phone somewhere, if your behavior around this phone is that, oh, it's okay in my pocket, but I'm not putting a passcode on it, or I'm not encrypting it, that's, again, this is where we really have some risk decisions and some behavior pieces to weigh, because you're right, with the token piece, there's nothing on there but a little number that changes, and unless you really know who that belongs to and what system it is going to work with, there is relatively low risk for me just leaving it here overnight. I'm making Randy all sweaty and nervous there. So, but the point is striking a balance, because I'd really rather see folks, protect their Gmail and get a thing on their phone and start to use it, than not. So the last piece is the kind of scary piece. It's the something you are. When we think about authentication, systems are starting to pop up that, I think, Max, do you have a fingerprint scanner on your IBM thingamajigger there, or your Lenovo? No? So some of the laptops, for the enterprise, corporate type laptops are starting to show up with fingerprint scanners. I think, are some mobile devices, has anybody seen that, where your fingerprint is starting to, the 5S does that? Yeah, so we're starting to get more mainstream as far as things that can take fingerprints. Other systems look at your retinal pattern. I've actually had to use one that did your hand geometry, so it was like a flat plate, and it had a post on it, so you put your thumb, between your thumb and your first finger on there, and boy, was that thing hard to use, and it was, I'll tell you what, it was wrong most of the time. So, voice recognition systems are starting to become mainstream. I don't know how well they do when people are sick or, what. Another neat one that has recently popped up and gotten some more exposure is your typing cadence. So, we could all type the exact same paragraph, and it's going to be completely different when you start to put it through a program that says, well, how far apart are the keystrokes? How is it different with the spacing? And I saw somebody using one finger yesterday, which was awesome. So, no, I couldn't believe it. So, this is something that, basically if you have a program running in the background, and as you type and start to do some things with the computer, it starts to sort of pick up some of these behavioral patterns. It can start to match fingerprints that way. Yes, question.
To work. Okay, there's Mike asked, he said the iPhone 5S uses fingerprint as a password, but should it be used as a password or as a username?
Well, I don't think that with the iPhone you have I don't think it's a couplet like that. I think it's a replacement for something that can be shoulder served. So like when I pull my phone up here, I know you can't see this in Adobe Connect Land, but I get a little keypad and I have to put numbers in. Now if somebody's sitting behind me, they can see that. Whereas so this is just a one factor, like it assumes the username because it's in my pocket. With the 5S, with the fingerprint, that's a replacement for that passcode. And I know some phones do like the pattern where you do the little ziggy-zaggy thing. Again, that can be shoulder served and stolen pretty easily. So it's actually it's a better option for that passcode or password or ziggy-zaggy thing because it's nobody's going to shoulder surf it. Even if you did know that I use a certain code over on this door or this lock, and maybe I reuse it because don't eat my own dog food, that you could try it on my phone, but with the fingerprint, there's really, it should be rock solid. I don't know how well that scanning technology works or how well that works. I haven't had a chance to play with it, but in theory, it's a much better option than the passcode or pattern matching. Good? Yep. So with these systems, so some of them are becoming a little more mainstream. Some of them work well in places. For the most part, they're still pretty difficult to implement in a large scale. And then we kind of get into some ugly stuff around storing biometric data, and I don't even know if we're ready to even have that discussion what that means. So that's way different than this talk. But just know that these systems, there's parts to them that we're not quite ready for that technology to be mainstream, at least not here at Penn State. And they are, again, I think I discussed that with that. They are hard. It's hard to fake biometric data. And then this is basically right now the highest degree of trust that we know of as far as electronic systems like that. So the one that we kind of want to talk a little bit more about today is the second factor piece. So the something you have. This is starting to gain mainstream acceptance. And the reason it's gaining mainstream acceptance is because the problems with a password. The passwords just aren't good anymore. So services such as Google, Facebook, Twitter, PayPal. Does anybody use second factor with any banks? Anyone? No one? I've actually emailed my bank several times. I do it about once a year and ask for second factor, and they're like, "Oh no, I'm like, "Oh, come on, please implement it." The reason that these social media platforms are starting to do this is because as this really becomes an outlet for how we communicate and how we relate, the stakes are higher. It's not just pictures of funny cats anymore. I was doing a Google image search for things like Twitter hacked and Facebook hacked, and it was stuff like Fox News saying that the White House was being attacked or the president was assassinated. Like if Fox News gets hacked and that goes out, that sucks, because that's, again, I trust these certain news outlets. The AP got hacked, and I forget what exactly. I think they said it was another terrorist type attack that the new World Trade Center site was being attacked, something like that. So it isn't just when celebrities have their stuff taken and it's kind of funny. It actually can have some ripple out impact when these accounts get stolen. So they really want that to stop. And again, I come back to that Matt Honan case from last year. It was a whole chain of events where his behavior basically led to a string of compromises across Amazon, Google, Twitter, and his Mac.com account. And had there been a second factor, probably in any one of those spots, the damage would not have been so complete to his life. So it is kind of important to know that the stakes are a little higher for some users of these services. That as more people get information from that, the trust in those is starting to change from being, oh yeah, that's just Twitter, to being, oh, this is how news moves around today. We do have some second factor services at Penn State. Some of you may be familiar with a Vasco or an RSA token if any of you access ISIS or IBIS. I don't know if we have any faculty. When you're doing grades, that requires a token. So we do have some limited use today for the systems that we deem important. We are currently piloting an enterprise-wide solution. We've contracted with Duo Security. It is a cloud-based solution, but we're looking to get that out to a wider audience so that it's really up to the service owner to decide how important or how what kind of risks they want to take. So we're not quite there yet, but if you can imagine it integrated with something like web access, if you were able to choose that when I hit web access, I want to be challenged to either do something on my phone, either get a code on my phone or push a button on my phone that would then allow the authentication to proceed. That's something we hope people see value in, given all that stuff I just said about the problem with passwords and the behaviors around passwords. So like I said, we're piloting that with a couple small places now. We're looking sometime mid next year to have that more widely available. And we do have a neat video. Jim and I tried to get this going with the communications group did do a video for us. Maybe I'll edit this and we can get the link in there so that if we share the Adobe thing, that explains this at a very high level. So maybe we can share that out after the fact. So as we start talking about our digital identity, some of these technologies, they can help, but it really comes down to how well you apply them and your behavior around them. You know, because again, if I'm careless with my phone, if I don't put a password on it, you know, that is something I have, probably not as good as it could be. If I'm sharing my passwords, or the big killer is password reuse. And I mean, how many accounts would you guys say you have out there? I mean, you know, it's 30, yeah, right, because you got, you know, yeah, all over the place. So I'm standing up here saying that you should have 30 different passwords. That's insane. It is. That's a terrible thing for me to come and say to you, but that's the case, and that sucks because really, if you're using the same password for some, you know, for Reddit, whatever, Reddit, and then you're using the same thing over here for Gmail, and I know that I can get from Reddit to Gmail, and then I can start emailing your bank, or I can start doing things as you, that there's a certain level of trust with the person on the other end. We're getting into some ugly stuff. The question is am I going to make some recommendations? Yes. That's our next slide. So there are some. I'll buy him a beer. All right. So there are password managers that really help in this space. The one that I use personally is called LastPass. So it integrates with the browser. Anytime it detects me setting up a new account, it asks me, do you want me to generate a password? So I can do a big 25, 30 character string. It just saves it. I have the key on my side in the browser. So actually, let me stop and talk about that for a second. So Last, L-A-S-T, Pass, P-A-S-S. If you do a Google search for it, one word, LastPass. Thanks, Jeff. So if you do a Google search for that, it's a cloud-based service. You pay, I think, $12 a year or something, and then it goes on. It works with your mobile device too, and you get some extra features, whatever. So before I get too far into this, I'm going to start talking keys, and I know for the folks in the room here, I have a fairly technical audience. I don't know who's in Adobe. But one of the things we always look at when we're evaluating cloud storage, cloud-based, you know, this is basically cloud storage. So when we look at any of these cloud-type services that say, oh yeah, our security is great, the first question we always ask is, well, who stores the private key? So in these systems, there's a private key and there's a public key. And basically, you do some things with the public key that allows data to be decrypted as you're doing end-to-end. Some services store the private key out in the cloud. And then you have to kind of trust that the admins, the sysadmins, the IT people who have access to those private keys aren't going to do anything with your data, because technically they could decrypt it if they're storing the keys. So one of the features I always look for when shopping around for these apps is where is the private key? And with LastPass, I own it. Now the downside of that is if I forget my password, I'm done. That is my, they can't unlock it for me. they don't have the private key. So it is pretty important that, yeah, you write it down and put it under your keyboard, Max. So it is. But it's an idea of weighing risk, and I prefer to take the responsibility of knowing that password and having the key down there. I then feel better about the things being out in the cloud when I have the private key. So anyhow, LastPass is one that I use. It integrates with my browser. There's apps for Android, for BlackBerry, for iPhone, for all the iOS stuff, iPads too. And it basically allows me to go to a website and I can kind of click a button, or I can configure it where it'll just autofill so that I automatically log into the things I use all the time. It'll also reprompt, so like anytime I go to log into my bank, or it'll store some of my credit card information so that when I'm shopping I can say fill this with my credit card information. And I've set that so that when I say fill it with my credit card information, it reprompts for a password, for the one password that I have to remember. So for all those 30 accounts, I have 30 different passwords, but I access them all through one. 1Password is another very similar service. I know several people use that. There's, I think, a yearly fee for that in the $30 to $50 range. Splash ID is another service, and it actually comes with it's more of a locker, has a USB key to it, and it kind of locks everything up, not necessarily web-based. And I already talked a little bit about the YubiKey, and I've actually integrated the YubiKey with LastPass. So when I turn my computer off and I launch my browser, and I don't have any session IDs stored or anything like that, I click to log into LastPass so that I can start using Gmail and I can start using all these different things. And it prompts me and says, "Hey, plug your YubiKey in and give me that search string," and does it. And then so I've basically put a second factor on LastPass. I also have second factor set up for Google. So I use their Authenticator service. So that has a simple app on here. It has 6 numbers. Anytime I'm logging into Google for the first time in a while, or if I've logged out, it asks me for those numbers, and I go to the app and find it. And to go back to the social media piece, I think Google does the app, and then Twitter and Facebook send you SMS codes. So depending on how you have your phone plan structured, those can cost you money, but it's neither here nor there. It's whatever you prefer. So one other thing to think about, so that's basically protecting your accounts as you're logging in, when you're logging in. It's also a good idea to kind of know where you are on the internet. If you use a common username, msocio or Eggman, or whatever your clever little handle is, when you're logging into places where you don't really want people to know your real identity, if you reuse that username, there's a good chance that there's data mining out there that'll track it back to you. There's several services, search engines that are specifically meant for either username or people-based search that go way deeper than what White Pages does. There's Namecheck, which is NAMECHK.com. Basically allows you to put in a username. It'll tell you all the places that username is used in social media, start to show you some addresses, phone numbers, whatever it can scrape off of there. Spokeo, Peepu, People, spelled P-I-P-L, are similar data miners for people. Some of these will actually, I think it's PQ, if you put in like a username, like what you get off of Reddit or a bulletin board type thing where you're not using your real name, if it can kind of connect the dots of all the places you've used that, it'll start to suggest real names of people in real geographical areas for it. So I learned about these in a social engineering context from, if you were going to be a bad guy, if you were going to put the black hat on and say, all right, that Matt Honan guy, he said something I don't like and I'm going to go get him. This is where I'd start. From a regular user perspective, I don't know how often you Google yourself, Google your own name to see what's going on and do a search to figure out what other people can see about you. It could be narcissistic if you're out in that space, but it's also good to know what other people can discover about you, so that you know kind of how far you're hanging out there, so to speak. That Mark Miller just said there's a whole lot of them Mark Millers out there, and he is lucky. There's probably a whole lot of John Smiths too. So yeah. So we'll kind of move into to some of our important data too. There's other places where your identity can be grabbed off of your computer, out of the cloud. I'm thinking things that we see fly around a lot are your tax returns, loan applications, applications to school, job application, things like that all have information that can be used to get another credit card, to get a loan, to get all sorts of stuff. And more and more that's moving to digital. Here, fill out this PDF with the latest version of Adobe and send that off to the bank, send it off to whomever. That's, again, behavioral stuff that, it's kind of hard to do that. Kind of hard to know everything that's on your computer, everything that's out there. And now that we're getting more and more mobile, and depending on our laptops and our iPads and things like that, the possibility for that data ending up in the wrong place is increased. So we definitely want to talk about encrypting your laptop. I think I don't know with the new version of iOS if when you do the password, if you're automatically encrypted. I know that's what it used to be. I should look that up. But basically, with your iPad, you want to definitely turn those settings on, password protected, get your encryption going. Same thing with the laptop. I know the latest versions of OS X now for a while have included File Vault, which will do full vault or full disk encryption. It used to just be your user folder, which was good, but now with the full disk encryption, that's a lot better. There's several products available, for the Windows laptops. You can even integrate some of the stuff on the Macs. We're to a point where we have an enterprise encryption product that if you're an IT person or your unit specifies that you have to encrypt your laptop, it can be done at the enterprise level with WinMagic and sort of get control of some of those devices that move all over the place. So the things, again, to think about, the data that we'd like you to start thinking about and like you to start protecting, to take some ownership and steward this data is really, again, your taxes, anything with financial information on it. If you have a personal business or loan information, applications for credit, for jobs, think about that stuff and where it goes and how you can best protect that. Penn State data, we're starting to realize that really on our network, our information is a heck of a lot more valuable than a lot of the computers on it. You know, this laptop we can. Randy's looking at it. I'm going to throw my laptop out the window. He doesn't want me to throw my laptop out the window, but really that's $2,000. Depending on what I do and what my job is, if I'm carrying data around with me, if I lose that data or it falls into the wrong hands, it can easily add up to a lot more than $2,000. And in all honesty, we can have this conversation around cost, but it'd be great if we understood that there's people on the other side of that data. These are our students, our coworkers, our faculty. If we're losing their data, you know, it's about the same as going up and just punch them right in the gut. We wouldn't do that, you know. we're mostly nice folks, you know. So it's, you know, again, when we go back to that first slide, you know, one of the first slides, the internet really abstracts this idea of identity and face-to-face stuff. But I'd love for people, if you took nothing else away from this, is that when we think about our Penn State data, there's people on the other side of it. And it's important to them for all of the reasons I just talked about. And if that makes you think even once, you know, in the next week, months, whatever, then awesome. It was well worth me standing up here and getting all sweaty and giving a presentation. So other places to think about our data, you know, we're computer nerds and stuff, so we think of everything in computer. We go paperless all the time, but there still is a lot of paper floating around. 80-35 is the policy that dictates that, depending on the type of data and certain things. You end up with a 3 to 5 year retention schedule. I don't know how many people stick to that. That's actually, where are you? Risk management. So we got risk management here. They stick to their retention schedule. So that's awesome. It is something, if you don't do it in your unit, definitely worth asking some questions. Hey, do we have a yearly audit of data that we're retaining? Because after a certain point, it can become a liability. We don't want it disappearing off into the ether to be abused. And really, the computers aren't the only way for it to leak. You know, we've been different places where, you know, the recycle bins are full of stuff that should not be in recycle bins. And if you have paper data that you're disposing, there are programs. Who is it that does the shredding? I don't think it's AIS. What's that? Oh, it is OPP. Yeah, like the blue bag thing. Yeah, the blue bag program. So if you look up the blue bag program on OPP, there are university ways of getting rid of data that's on paper. That's really all I have for today. Do we have any other questions? Max, do you have anything else you need to add? Did I miss anything? Thanks for that. I appreciate your participation. Anything in Connect Land? Well, you guys get 15 minutes back, huh? All right. Thanks, everyone, for coming. There's my contact information. Nick, sorry you didn't make it. But we got our websites up there for SOS and IAM. The reason I put those up there is Identity Services is really going to be the owner of the two-factor service. I'm just one of the technical leads. So Identity Services will end up owning that service. I'd be happy to answer questions about it at any time, but they will end up being the authority on that. So, Chuck. Oh, yeah. So if you're interested in keeping track of what's going on with the two-factor project, there is a Yammer group. There's a public Yammer group called Two-Factor Authentication at PSU. If you guys have any questions about what we're doing, or you're interested in the service, we're starting to share information. Two-Factor Authentication at PSU is a public group to discuss not just our project, but other things that relate to two-factor. Thanks, Joe. Any other questions? All right, we'll wrap it up. Thanks, everybody.